In this lecture, we're going to be finalizing the introduction to 3D Max. First, we're going to be talking about grouping. So I'm going to just throw a small box in here, and let's say a sphere, maybe a teapot. Okay, so now I have three different objects. First thing, I can select each one of those and work with them by moving, rotating, or scaling. But I can select them, all the three of them, and I can go group, and then I can group them all together, and I create something, let's say I'm going to call it group 1. Great. So now if I will select the sphere, I won't be able to select the sphere by itself, but I have to select the whole group. For example, if I want to select the sphere by itself, now I cannot. So what I need to do, I have to access the group tab. I'm going to just detach this. So I have it here all the time. So if I group it, I can ungroup now, and then everything is back to normal. So this box is by itself, this sphere, and this is the teapot. So I can move, rotate, scale, and do whatever I want with them by themselves, each one alone. Now, if I group these together again, and I'm call it group 1, I can, instead of ungrouping it, I can open the group. The group is still there, but it's open now. You can see it by this pink color. Okay, this is the group bounding box. So I can select the individual items and I can move them. And when I'm done, I can select any of the object, or I can select the group bounding box and I say close. So I can close the group now, so everything is perfect. So if I want, I can open it again, move maybe the sphere back, maybe here, and then close. So now the group is this. If I open the group again, maybe get the sphere back here, maybe scale this box, and now close. So now the group is back all together. So I can have a group of multiple objects. I can ungroup it as if we just throw the group in the garbage and then all the pieces are separate again. If I want to have a group again, I need to do a new group. Or if I don't want to create a new group every time, I can just open the group, fix whatever I want to fix, and then close the group again. Great. Now, if I have, for example, in here a cylinder, and I just realized that this cylinder is not part of this group. If I want this object, or this cylinder in this case, to join this group, all I need to do is select the object and then attach. And then it's going to say which group I want to attach. I want to attach this group, click on it, and now it's part of this group again. So I can now open the group. This is part of the group. Can you see? It's part of the group. When I'm done, close the group. So it's part of the group. If by mistake I have this object inside a group and I don't want it to be in the group, so I need to open the group, select the object that you don't want it to be part of the group, and say detach. So it's going to be detached from the group. As you can see, the marquee is now closed in here. And now I can select any object of the group and close. So now this objects together are a group, and this object is alone. So this is the first thing we're going to talk about, is basically grouping. Groups are very important, especially to organize our file. So instead of having many objects, I can group them together and make them as groups and name them and finalize everything. The second thing we're going to talk about is basically the pivot points. I'm just going to delete everything. Just create any object, for example, a box. And by default, as we said, the object is moving through this point. So if I rotate this object, it's going to be rotated through this point, which is called the pivot point. So if I want to scale also, if I scale on Z, you can see it goes up and doesn't go down. While if I scale on Y, it goes on both sides, because the pivot point is centered on the bottom part of the box. But if this is not convenient to me, I can just move this pivot point. To move the pivot point, all I need to do is go to the Hierarchy tab, Affect Pivot Only. And when you press Affect Pivot Only, you can see that there's this new gizmo getting on, which is for the pivot point. Usually a pivot point, it's best to move it other than rotate it or scale it. So we're gonna just move the pivot point, and I can move my pivot point wherever I want. So in my case, I'm going to put my pivot point here, just outside of the box. When I'm done, I just turn off the affect pivot point to save my pivot point here. And now I can move my pivot point from this point. If I rotate, it's going to be rotated from this point now. And if I want to scale it, it's going to be scaled from this point. Okay, so it does change the effect of all my transformation due to the pivot point location. So if I go to hierarchy, I can go affect pivot point and I can move my pivot point wherever I want. The second thing I can do, I can change the alignment. For example, center to object. It will go directly to the center of the object. I can align it to another object, or I can align it to word, which are not really so much used. So center to object is a quick alignment. Okay. Another thing we can press is reset pivot, and it will go by default where it was. So this is basically the pivot point location. We do use the pivot point to move to help us with the modeling part and definitely with the animation part later on. Great. After the pivot point, we're going to just work on mirrors. So I'm just going to create, let's say, a teapot. So this is my teapot. And if I want to create a mirror of this teapot, I can just use my shortcut icon, which is in here, mirror, or I can go tools, mirror. Okay, so great. You see, it's great because I don't have transform. So I'm going to press on move, W, tools, mirror. So I can mirror this teapot based on the axis I want. So in my case, if you can see, the teapot is flipped now because I'm mirroring on the x-axis. If I want, I can mirror on the y-axis or I can mirror on the z-axis. It depends on what I want. In my case, I do want to mirror on the x-axis. But the thing is that it's flipped. So now the offset is basically the movement of this mirrors. For example, I'm just going to move it this much. I don't care about the value. Clone selection, you can see it is not no clone. So the original teapot or the object is already mirrored and moved. What if I want the original to stay? So I can say as copy. So now the original is here and this is a copy of it which is mirrored, or an instance, for example. In this case, it doesn't matter, and just move this object wherever I want. Great. So this is a mirror on the x-axis. Now, what if I want my my other objects? For example, I'm just going to draw something else. For example, there's a box in here to make it clear, and I'm going to do, let's say, a teapot. I should have kept it. Okay, I have a teapot in here. I'm going to go mirror, and it says copy and on x-axis. Great. And then I'm going to move this on the other side. Okay, so as you can see, it's mirrored on the center of the object based on this value. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to move my pivot point. So I'm going to go access the hierarchy tab, affect pivot point only, and then I'm going to move my pivot point. I'm going to go to the top view. I press T on the keyboard. So I'm just going to place it in the center by visually. Okay, I'm just going to set my affect pivot point back. Now, if I go to the teapot, I go to mirror, and you can see it will be mirrored based on this point. So now it's mirrored based on the center of the box without adding no offset. Okay, so you can mirror any object based on the pivot point of it. By default, the pivot point was in the center. That's why it was flipping in the center. But now I moved my pivot point, so it mirrored based on this pivot point on the x-axis. Okay, now just gonna delete everything. Just gonna create a box, and I'm gonna create another box, maybe a copy of this. So shift and drag to copy this box. This box I'm gonna change it in scale. Okay, and then move on X and Y and Z, and also rotation. Great. Now I have this box, and I'm gonna use my align tools. I can access the align tools from the shortcut icon from here, or I can go tools, align. And I have different types of align, so I'm going to cut this, and I'm going to keep it, close the group, and I'm going to keep this. Same thing in here. If I click and keep pressing, these are the icons for the align. I'm going to use the first two, which is the Align tool and the Quick Align tool. Align tool, Quick Align tool. Shortcuts for Align is Alt-A. Quick Align is Shift-A. Great. Now, if I'm going to select this box, and then I'm going to press Shift-A, which is Quick Align, I'm going to align this box to this object. Click on it. Automatically, it will jump from this location to this location based on the pivot point. So the pivot points are attached or snapped together. So this pivot point is over this pivot point in X and Y, Z. Great. So I'm going to do it again. So Quick Align on this object. So it will jump from this location to this location based on the pivot point. Because the pivot point is in the center, object is snapping or aligning at the center. Why it's called Quick Align? Because it doesn't ask me any question. It's just do an alignment based on X-axis, Y-axis, Z-axis. Okay, it will get aligned to this X-axis, Y-axis, Z-axis to this point. So this pivot point will jump to this pivot point in all three directions, in X and Y and Z of the move, only the move. Okay, great. Now, if I don't want just a move alignment, I need to align in different things. I can use the Align instead of Quick Align. So I'm just going to select this box, Align, and then I'm going to align to this. By default, it will do almost the same thing. Technically, it will do the same thing because by default, this is the option. But now I have more options here. It doesn't. That's why it's not Quick Align. Align, I have more options, so I can change and move and do whatever it suits me. So I'm just going to turn these off back as it was. So I can align on X-axis, I can align on Y-axis, and I can align on Z-axis in the move, in the position. Or I can do the three of them, as I was before. Now I want to align based on the pivot points, or maybe the centers, or maybe the minimum and the maximum. I'm going to discuss this in a different example, which will make sense better. In this case, most of the times, we will align based on the pivot point or based on the center. Okay? In this case, it doesn't matter because the pivot point and the center are the same. And now, I can align the orientation. I can align the X-axis or the Y-axis or the Z-axis, for example. And I can match scale, for example, the X-axis, the Y-axis, or the Z-axis. In my example, are these. Oops, it's not working. Okay, so there's something wrong with it. So anyway, so I can match usually alignments, orientation, and scale. Usually, the most thing we use is basically the move, the position. Orientation and scale are not very steady. As you can see in this case, it didn't work properly. So it is matching the axis, Z-axis, the Y-axis, sorry, of the scale. But when I orient, when I rotate, it goes crazy. But at the same time, if I orient only by itself, it will do it correctly. But when I scale, it will go crazy. So it's not a big deal. So now I'm just gonna do another example for alignments. I'm just gonna draw a box of different sizes. I'm just gonna shift and drag and copy 3 different objects. I'm just gonna scale it. And just gonna move it randomly. Okay. Now, what I want, this is object number 1, which is the most important one, and I need to align these 3 or 4 or more than 1 to this object. So I'm gonna go align to this object. As you can see, they will jump on it because I'm doing alignment on position on X, Y, and Z. I'm just gonna turn them off. Technically, I want to align only on Z-axis. So I'm gonna turn on Z-axis only. That's good. And now I'm gonna orient or align on the pivot point, so on the lower level. But what if the pivot point was not in the center? For example, I wanted to be oriented on the top. I can align from the center. They are aligned in the center. But I can align on the minimum of this with the minimum of this, or the maximum with the maximum. So I'm gonna align from the top area or from the bottom area This is what the minimum and maximum. I can definitely align the minimum with the maximum. So the minimum of these three with the maximum of this. So this is the straight line in here, or the opposite way, the maximum of this with the minimum of these. So it's going to be like this. Okay, so I can align in a different way using alignment. Quick align and align. Usually quick align is very useful for quick stuff. Just we know by default it's going to be aligning X, Y, Z of the position, pivot point on the pivot point. This is by default. If I want something different, I have to go align and put my information that I need. Now, we're just going to cancel this. I'm just going to delete all those. And we're going to go through snapping, which is very important in Max. I'm just going to create two separate objects, two boxes. And I'm going to access my snapping toggles. This is the icon for snapping toggles. Shortcut for snapping toggles is letter S. So I can turn it on and turn it off, or by letter S on and off. What is snapping? If I want to snap this object to be snapped on exactly the corner of this object, or exactly in the center, or whatever. So first of all, I turn on the snap. You can see there's an arrow in here, which means there's more than one option. There's a 2D snap, 2.5, and 3D snap. I'm not going to use the 2D snap because 2.5D is almost the same, and 3D snap is the 3D snap. So what's the difference between a 2.5 or a 2 and the 3D snap? 2.5 or 2, they do snapping on 2D axis, so on two axes. So usually we do a 2D snap from the front, from the top, and the left, because we cannot see the third axis, so we don't snap 3D. While if we're using perspective or orthographic or maybe a camera, it's always preferably to snap on a 3D. Great. I'm going to be working with perspective, so I'm going to have the 3D snap on. The second thing I have to do, I'm going to right click on this icon to access my snappings. So if I want to snap, by default you have the grid points active, so I'm going to snap on grid points. So if I want to snap on grid points, you can see I can snap on each and every grid point. I can snap on vertices, which are the vertices of the object. We're going to go through them later on. We can snap on perpendiculars, on pivots, on tangents, on endpoints, and so on. Usually, most of the times, we use vertices, vertex, okay? The second option, we might use usually midpoints or maybe grid points, but the others are rarely used, but it depends on the need of the project you're working on. So I'm gonna just activate vertex. I'm gonna close this, and now I'm gonna be snapping to the vertices. You can see I can snap on these vertices on the corners of each object, okay, with this yellow cross. Great. Now, if I select the object and I click in here, I'm just going to be creating another box. So what I need to do, I need to snap. So I need to move. I'm going to go to move, and I'm going to go in here. I'm just going to go close enough so I can snap and then move a bit more until my cursor changes to a move tool. So now I can click in here and drag. As you can see, it's just snapping. Now, it's snapping in a wrong way. By default, it doesn't do this. So what I need to do, I'm just going to go to this icon. I'm going to right click in here, and I'm going to turn off enable access constraint. I'm going to go back to it later on. So click on this and click and drag, and you can snap in this point, or this point, or this point, or this vertex, this vertex in here or here. So I can snap it, and it's snapping exactly 100%. If I don't want to snap on a vertex, I can snap, for example, on a midpoint. So I'm going to snap the midpoint of this to the midpoint of this, or the midpoint of this. As you can see in here, it's snapped on the midpoint. So it's exactly in the center. So I can use snapping to get exactly what I want. For example, I want to draw a box, maybe start exactly from this point. So I'm going to go vertex. I'm going to turn off midpoint. Usually it's preferable not to have more than two options turned on. Usually some people, they like to turn a lot of them or have them all on. In Max, especially if you're using different software such as AutoCAD or stuff, in Max it comes a bit of chaos. So it's always preferred to turn on one or two sometimes, because if you want to, for example, snap a vertex to a midpoint, for example, I will have them both. In my case, I'm just going to turn on vertex for now. I'm just going to draw a box from here exactly. So you can see I snapped it in here, and I want it to be, for example, this. So it's snapped from here and just create. So I can create another box over it, for example, or maybe draw something else, for example, a pyramid. So I'm just going to go, instead of creation method center, look what the center does. It does, where I click is the center. I want it to be the base. So click and drag from this point to another. And now these two boxes are snapped exactly over each other, and the pyramid is snapped exactly over them. There's no difference. There's no any movement, or this is snapping. Great. Now, just going to delete them back. So I can use snap as 2D or 3D, and then I would choose which snapping option I need. Then I'm just going to go to snap angle or angle snap toggles. So I'm just going to create a box, for example. If I want to rotate this box, I can just click and drag and rotate, and you can see in here there's a value. It's basically a fraction, which is a bit hard if I want to get a full number. Definitely, I can just go right-click to the rotation, and I can put the full number here, for example, in my case on the z-axis, let's say 25 degrees, and it will be rotated 25 degrees, if this is what I want. Or I can turn on angle snap, and now if I rotate, it will be snapped by default every 5 degrees. So the numbers will be much better. I can change this value by going in here, right-click, and this is my angle. By default, it's 5 degrees. I can put it 1 degree, or I can put it 25 degrees or 90 degrees, depending on the option. For example, I'm going to say 1 degree now. So I'm just going to click and drag, and I can go any degree I want as a full number. So 1, 2, 3 till 360, and then forever. Okay, so that's great. We can go using this. Usually I use this all the time to get accurate rotation, but if you want to use right click on the rotation, you can definitely always use this. Great. So now I have snapping. So now if I want to create this box, and I created another box, so now I turned on snap, move. I'm gonna snap this point to this point, so it is 100% snapped and accurate. Okay, if I want to move, snap this point maybe to this point, now it is snapped from this point. Great. Now, what if I have this object in here and I want it to be snapped based on this value, this point? So if I move this point in here, and you can see I'm moving the object on XYZ. I don't want it to move on XYZ, I want it to move only on X. So if I select the X axis and try to move, you can see it's always moving on all axes because I have the snapping toggles on. If I turn off the snapping, you can see I can move only on X. But the problem, I cannot snap because I want this to be visually accurate 100% on the same alignment of this. So what I can do, I'm gonna turn on snapping. I'm gonna right click here and I'm gonna turn on enable axis constraint. Okay, this is what I turned off before. Instead of turning it on from here, I'm just gonna do this. I'm gonna right click in here, okay, on any of these snaps. Just right click in here, okay, and I'm gonna search for something called axis constraint, and I'm gonna add it as a window. So I'm gonna just click and drag and place it wherever you want. In my case, I'm gonna place it in here, and this icon is exactly the same as this. So enable axis constraint is this icon, so I can enable it or disable it. I put it as a menu in here because I use it most of the times. Now, what's happening if I turn axis constraint on, it means I'm gonna be snapping, okay, based on an axis. Which axis? X, Y, Z, or two axes if you want. In my case, most of the cases I use usually one axis. So in my case, this case is X axis. So I'm gonna select this point and click and drag. As you can see, it's just moving on X, and this point is going to be snapped to this point. Now they are perfectly aligned on this axis. If I want something else, for example, on the Z axis, I can click this point and snap it to the lower point, and you will see they are on the same level now. on the z-axis. Same thing if I want on the y-axis or the x-axis, all I need to turn it on, make sure the axis constraint is on, and then use the axis and then snap this point to another point based on the axis you're selecting. The last thing I'm going to talk about in this lecture is basically how I can hide objects or unhide objects. For example, I have these objects, doesn't matter what. For example, I have this teapot in here and so on. So I have several objects. If they are distracting me and I don't want them to be there, definitely I can delete it. But if I don't want it to be deleted, I just can select this object, right click on it, and I can access these options. I can hide my selection, right click, hide selection, right click, hide selection, right click, hide selection, and I can say hide unselected. So if I select this hide unselected, everything that's not selected will be hidden. In my case, I don't have anything else. I say unhide all, they get back, they're not deleted, they're just hidden. So right click, unhide all. Or for example, I'm going to select this box and right click, hide unselected, so everything is going to be selected. Then right click, unhide by name, and then I'm going to unhide only, let's say, the teapot. Okay, or right click, unhide all, and everything will be hidden. So this is a very good option that will help us to make our scene a bit more flexible and maybe visible better, to make things work properly, or you can see better. So I can hide and hide every object I want. Same time, I can select, for example, these two objects. I can right click, I can freeze them. If they are frozen, technically they are still there, but they are unselectable, and you can see they are gray in color. This is the default, we can change this, but they are unselected, which is great. So I want them to be there, but I don't want to select them by mistake when I'm moving or doing something. So I freeze them. When I'm done, right click, unfreeze all, and they are back to normal. The third option, which is very important, is isolate. So what is isolate? So if I select this object, right click on that, isolate selection, this selection will get only visible, the other will be as if they are hidden. But the thing is, you get close to this object so you can work with it properly. And when I'm done, right click and isolate, and you go back to the same view that you were before. Because it's important, we have a shortcut for it. This is the shortcut for it. Isolate selection. I can turn it on, turn it off. And the shortcut for it is Alt-Q. I can turn it on, and then you have to press in here, or right click and isolate if you don't want it anymore to be isolated. So isolate, right click and isolate, or use this icon in here. So this is basically it. Now, if you go to display tab, we can change some of the display. We can hide by category instead of hiding by object. We can hide all geometry. In my case, I don't have other than geometry, but I can hide all shapes or lights, all cameras, and so on. We can go through them later on when we start working with shapes and lights and cameras and helpers and so on. If we go down, we can have the hide options. So we can hide selection, unselected, we hide by name, or we have something else called hide by hit. So hit, hit, hit. Whenever you click, you will hide. At the same time, you can unhide all. I can freeze. The same thing, freeze selection or freeze unselected, or freeze by hit. And the last option is the display property. For example, I want show frozen in gray. If I don't want them to be shown in gray, so I can select now these, right click, freeze. Now they are frozen, but they remain the same color. It depends what exactly you want. So we can change some of the option of the display. So unfreeze all. In my case, I prefer to keep them in gray so I can differentiate between these objects and the other objects which are frozen and which are not. Depends on what the need you have. Okay, so this is basically it. This is a quick introduction to 3D Max, how to start working with the 3D Max. In the next lecture, we're going to do a small practice working with the basics of 3D Max, how to move, how to copy, and we're going to create something simple so we can get ready to start with the modeling part.